Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the On the Sofa this evening, this lovely bank holiday evening. So, first of all, I think we just need to pass our thoughts on to Sven Gorik Eriksson's family and friends on his passing today. So, rest in peace, Sven. And I'm going to bring Vic on, so I know he's got some SAS travel news. Hiya.
Hi, good evening to you, Chris. We should, of course, say Sven-Göran Eriksson was a part of Notts County for a little while, was he not? And so, of course, we play Notts County on Saturday. So I'm sure that most of football will be marking his passing during the weekend. Yes, I do have some SAS news for you. Now, if people either want Barrow or Exeter City, of course, is next Tuesday. Barrow the following Saturday. 2:30 leaving the county ground for Exeter. 7 a.m. for Barrow on the Saturday. They need to book by the close of play on Wednesday. Now, Port Vale is on sale now. £21 for members, £23 for non-members. Leaves the county ground at 10:30. Also reminding you that due to other commitments, there'll be no phone bookings or Legends Lounge bookings between the 30th of August and the 13th of September. But shop bookings will still be available as per normal shop opening hours. So that's the news from SAS. I'm sure you're going to put the number and details on the bottom of the screen very shortly. Yes. We should also say well done to both the women and indeed to the academy over the course of the weekend. The women beating Bournemouth Sports by goal to nil at the county ground. Annie Colston with a goal and Gypsy Vivash making a 100th appearance for the club. So congratulations to Gypsy. And also the under-18s in the Youth Alliance Cup beat Walsall 3-0. So two Swindon teams winning over the course of the weekend. The first team, of course, 0-0 draw at Crewe.
Okay, so we were due to have Niall on tonight from Fairgame, but unfortunately his Wi-Fi is not very good. He's over in France and his Wi-Fi isn't that good. So we've got a very capable deputy in Josh. So I'm just going to bring Josh on.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. Okay, I'm going to leave you to it and I will see you later.
Any questions, of course, send them through as normal. Josh, thank you very much for... Is it Josh or Joshua?
It's Josh, yeah. Joshua's very formal. Unless I'm in trouble, then you might have to refer to me as Joshua, but no.
Yeah, when I was a child, I had the same thing with my name as well. It was elongated when I was in trouble and not when it wasn't. Give us an idea of your background with Fairgame UK. Head of club engagement, is that right?
Yes, that's correct. So I'll give you a bit more of a background onto my sort of expertise in football, however.
And he's frozen. So come back to us, Joshua, can you? No, he's frozen. There he is. Sorry, what you froze for a moment.
Sorry, yes, I'm back now. Sorry. Yeah, no problem. So my background is, I used to work at the EFL in finance. So I worked in club financial reporting. So it's my duty to enforce and monitor financial regulations across the 72 member clubs. Whilst I was there, we sort of the world exploded, for better terms. We had obviously everything that happened with some named clubs. Then we had sort of we had COVID-19, European Super League, fan review, all that sort of happened whilst I was at the EFL. So then I used to be positioned within the finance department and I transitioned into the club financial reporting unit. So we had a larger team to support financial regulations in English football. And off the back of that, the amount of sort of scrutiny enforcement we started to put into clubs, I decided that I was in the best, and I could see clubs needed this support, especially in the lower divisions. They didn't necessarily have that education or expertise in this area. So I decided to launch my own sort of consultancy and education company around financial regulations and football around 2 years ago. Goal Assist is the name of the company. And on launch of that, I ended up getting involved with Fairgame. So I've been involved with Fairgame for about 2 years now. And obviously with my background at the EFL, it was sort of natural for me to sort of fall into the club side because I already had a relationship with a lot of clubs, a lot of owners, a lot of people like that, because that was sort of what I did at the EFL. So that's sort of my background. But I did so.
He's frozen again. So hopefully he'll be back very shortly. We might ask him to log out and then log back in again because of the complete freezing there. If you want to get in touch, send us a message through either on Facebook, X, or indeed on YouTube. But Josh, if you could sort of log... Oh, he's back again, is he?
Apologies. If that keeps happening, I do massively apologise. Yeah, so all I was going to say was, so I've been involved with Fairgame for about 2 years now. And 2 years ago, Fairgame was a very different organisation. It was much smaller in terms of the amount of people working there. And so I've been across multiple things, including this year, I was heavily involved in the index. So any sort of questions, I know that's sort of the focal point of today's discussion. So I'm more than happy to sort of answer any questions as to how it was scored, why it was scored in this way, etc. So I'm more than happy to help.
Okay, well, let's have a look at Swindon Town then. They're 5th in Division 2. They've moved up the table, 43rd nationally, 23.4 out of 40 on finance, 9.8 out of 30 on governance, and 6.4 out of 20 on fan engagement. Now, as you might be aware, there's been a lot of skepticism about how that's been arrived at. A lot of fans have had problems with the way Swindon Town's been run over the last few years, and they're all a little surprised that Swindon have moved up the table to 5th place. Can you explain that?
Yeah, massively. So the way in which the data is collected, it's all around transparency, because Fairgame want to allow supporters to keep fans to account. To keep clubs to account. So essentially, the only way in which Swindon Town can know about the club's finances is based on how much the club disclose of their finances. So the reason why Swindon Town actually score highly in finance compared to a lot of other people in the league is because Swindon Town, especially this year, was really transparent with their finances. They worked actually, especially with my consultancy firm, we did a fan report based on sort of their accounts, and we broke into detail. So you get the full wages, you get the revenue, you get the player expenditure, like all the finances are sort of laid out. And although the finances can always be improved in a football club, and we've got to remember that it's a year behind because it's last year's financial accounts, the fact that Swindon Town are so transparent with this information allows them to score well, because a lot of clubs, especially in League Two, only have small company accounts, which basically means they don't disclose much at all to the fans. So the fans are completely unaware, realistically, how the club is being run financially. So therefore, there's only so many points that are available for those clubs to get, because how can we evaluate something that isn't available? So, and that sort of is the theme across all the pillars. So even with governance, for example, a lot of the things around governance are scored as such, like, I know one of the questions around governance will be something like, has the club got an anti-slavery policy? For example, that's one of the things of the many metrics that would fall under governance. That information for Swindon is relatively well publicised. The website's up to date. It's got lots of information available. So from a transparency point of view, Swindon Town have been very transparent with the fans and have worked quite closely with Fairgame ourselves. So it's meant that Swindon Town had scored very well compared to, especially against those clubs who aren't transparent with this sort of information. So I think the real focus on how well they've scored has been mainly to do with how transparent they are with the information, less than against the efficiency in which they're operating as a club, if that makes sense.
Right. As far as you're concerned, how transparent have they been? Because there are many questions about the transparency. Many fans have expressed concern. Here, for instance, is a question from Daniel. How can Fairgame rate a football club in the top 5 when they have reportedly failed to pay key services such as police, fined by the FA for failing to pay their players, and failing to pay the joint venture on time? You must understand that this report and the reality we are seeing as fans makes us feel that the Fairgame report feels rather contradictory. What would you say to that?
So again, some of this, and again, not all of it, and I agree with the question in general terms, is that, again, the financial accounts are 22-23 rather than 23-24 accounts, because obviously how you upload to Companies House and like the legality of when you upload your account. So in terms of that is another issue that we're seeing. So, and you're not the only club that have been coming to us with these sort of questions, because so much can happen in the space of 12 months. I know some of the issues in which Swindon Town, and the fans will definitely tell me this in the comments and everything, have been going on for more than the last 12 months. But in terms of its transparency with the financial reporting aspect. If you look at the Swindon Town financial report that was published compared to, say, even a Accrington Stanley, which we know in sort of regular terms are a very well-run club, but in terms of their transparency, they haven't been as transparent with their information, so haven't been able to score as well as they would have liked as a football club. So that's sort of the stance. It's more of the time lag, which is it's a negative of the index, but it's just how finances are sort of always been published across all industries, not just football.
Are you continuing to monitor then? I mean, would you say, as this process goes on, do you still have a complete open look at the books? If you knocked on the door tomorrow and said, can we have a look at your books? What's going on? Where's this money going? What's happening with this money? Do you have an open book like that?
Yeah, so during the process when I wrote the report with Swindon, and there is a second report which I will share with a link afterwards, which we'll post it tomorrow. There was just to give a bit of a background on the second report, which will answer a lot of questions for the fans. There's been a changeover at the trust with the treasurer, who I was working closely with at the time, and all the rest of it. But the report has been finalised and all been sorted. So I will share that with you all tomorrow. But in terms of, they were completely open. So because I used to work at the EFL as well, I was sort of aware of some of the financial information they have to disclose to the EFL. So, for example, for pre-season and mid-season, you have to disclose your SCMP, which is your salary cost management protocol, which has got all the player expenditures, what you're looking to spend over the transfer window, etc. It's sort of like that sort of live document what they have to send to the EFL. I was aware of that being in existence, obviously, because of my job, and my job was to review these documents. So Swindon at the time disclosed all of this, the Reg 16 FFI, which they have to do in April, which, again, I know I'm sort of talking gibberish here, but it's essentially, it's a forecast where they have to show what they're forecasting to do over the next 12 months. So not only what they were actually doing now, they also have to disclose a forecast to the EFL. And I also had access to all this information as well. So although for obviously with forecasts and all the rest of it, things can obviously change in real time. And that's why as at the EFL, it is constant live monitoring to make sure these forecasts are being sort of there or thereabouts kept to. There's limits on what can be disclosed publicly on that. But in terms of us having access to that as fair game, Swindon have been completely open with us.
All right. Well, it's a message from Richard, and this is what he says. So I'm sorry, but this is nonsense. Swindon Town has been the polar opposite of transparent with its fans about the club's finances. Admin costs ballooned in recent years, and instead of explaining this in simple terms and round numbers, the fans were told, wait for the fair game report. Now, these admin costs have never been explained. So can you explain what they are?
Right. So in terms of administration costs, I think the issue is, all costs have ballooned. And I think, again, I know I'm just saying, like, I'm not just powering this or saying what to read the report that's coming out tomorrow, but all of the, it's in line with what the rest of League Two are spending. It's not like it doesn't look, when you look at it next to the other clubs, it's not crazy. It genuinely isn't. And as well, especially at a time in which inflation has gone up so much, like, I don't think people realize. So I know this is League Two, but I've been working closely with a League One club as well. And they were saying that empty stadium, it still costs us £2 million a year, just in lights and, electric and heating and all the rest of it. So like these costs that are going up substantially for costs. I mean, everyone's seen this in their home lives. Like, you don't need me to tell you that electricity and everything else has gone up in recent years. So I know that doesn't cover all of the costs, but it's the compound of all these extra little things that have gone on does make a massive difference to your bottom line. And the good thing is about these questions is, as we continue to work with the club, if this is something that needs to be spelled out in more detail next year, this is something that we can approach the club and say, look, I know we did this level of detail in the last report, and this was the first one we worked with them on. It's a case of the fans still want extra information on this. Can we break this down even more for the fans? And I'm sure they'll be okay with that, because in all fairness, me working with Clem and everybody else involved with the football club, they have sort of been eager to show transparency, because they know it's not just the issues that have happened recently. Swindon Town in the past have also suffered a lot of sort of bad ownership. I don't like to say that because there's always mitigating circumstances, and you don't know everything that's gone on behind the scenes. But I think it's not a crazy statement to say that Swindon Town has gone through a lot of issues in the past, and that's why fans are really good. I mean, the fact that I'm here today and the fact that the fans try to hold the club to account on everything that it does is a really good sign. And the fact that I'm here today also shows that how willing the supporters trust the club and everyone is to work with Fairgame, because it shows they're engaging and they're trying to do the right things. And I think the message of wait for the Fairgame report is because when I was speaking to the club, and again, I'm sure they'll be happy for me to say this, they prefer the messaging to come from us because we're third party and we have no sort of interest in terms of we're only going to state what we see. We're not ever going to show any more or less than what we've seen. So there's no reason for us to try and state the club is better off than it is or worse off than it is. We're just going to, these are the facts. This is what we're reporting.
Okay, this is from Jamie. Interesting context explaining how scoring works. However, why not split analysis into two different sets of scoring? Then one score for transparency and second score for financial performance. Would that not help fans not so used to company analysis? I mean, I don't know about business. I'm not a business person. Does this go on in business? Is this a similar process to this?
I think in terms of splitting the score, so we're always in discussions at Fairgame as to how can we improve the index, because it's one of the things that we know is sort of the key things that go out to fans every year. And I think not just the index, but also the messaging of how we get across the index. And I think the difference between sort of transparency and sustainability, it would be quite an interesting split. So if that is something that you've got thoughts on, then we're more than happy to look into that in terms of so you can understand what you're scoring for what side of the index as such. In terms of in general business, I mean, there are industry reports that go out there covering different industries, but football is always under the microscope. I'll give you an example. So even from a government point of view, so HMRC send a monthly account to the EFL, again, I'm drawing on my experience there, stating how much each football club owes to HMRC at the end of that period to make sure that, like, they are absolutely on it to make sure there's no mispayments to HMRC. I run multiple businesses, and I'm obviously completely okay with HMRC, never had a problem, but I'm sure that they're not running a monthly report saying how much I owe, like in how much detail and the sort of scrutiny that's put onto football because of the platform football's on. There is a lot of scrutiny around sort of how football businesses run, especially in the last few years. It's really sort of heightened. So there are sort of other industries that have this sort of scrutiny, but football in terms of the reporting and stuff has significantly increased over the last few years.
Okay, some more comments, and then I've got questions, obviously. This is from Max. Quick couple of questions from me. Why is the ranking used for every single club when they aren't getting full info from all clubs? I mean, obviously, our dear friends up the road aren't part of Fairgame. Not all the clubs in the Football League are. So is this a fair comparison? I mean, obviously, I think Tottenham have come out on top. It's something like 68% over the whole Premier League, Football League and Scottish League, etc. I mean, to me, 68% doesn't seem a lot. You know what I mean? If you're going to come top of a league, you want to be somewhere in the 80s, 90s. So all these fair comparisons, or are they not? Well, we got a frozen screen again. Oh no, he's back again.
Apologies. I did get the gist of the question.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So two things is absolutely. So there is a bar that needs to be raised in football. The fact that the best ranked club in England, Tottenham, was only scoring just over 70 points is ridiculous. Like, football should be doing much better than it is. And we know as a football industry, we have to move forward. Financial sustainability, we need complete redistribution of finance across the pyramid. We need to make sure that there isn't a reward for this gambling culture of, because the reward is so great for promotion. There's so much willing to gamble to try and get that promotion. It shouldn't be as, and if you actually look at the Scottish football pyramid, because the distribution works slightly differently, the finances are actually far more stable because there's less of this gambling culture. Obviously, football clubs still want to try and get promoted and push to sort of increase their squad depth, but it's not as the gambling culture isn't as strong in the Scottish pyramid. But yeah, so the fact that everyone scored so low is obviously a bad thing, and I think that we know that, and that's why what's happening with Fairgame and the independent regulator. The independent regulator won't be coming in if every club was scoring 100. And in terms of, is it a fair comparison? This is sort of the point. It's like, it isn't fair that some football fans, I mean, Swindon Town, although there's obviously queries in the terms of the way in which the club is being run, at least the information is out there with Swindon Town, especially over the last sort of financial period. Some football fans literally aren't being told anything. So when you're comparing like for like, it's like, well, these other clubs, they need to be more transparent with their fans. So because as well, there's certain clubs out there which we know logically are actually quite well run, but unless they prove this, unless they show this in their accounts, unless they're actually transparent with the information, really the fans don't have a clue. They don't know what's happening with the finances. They don't know how much revenue they generated, how much is being spent on wages, because even that sort of basic information isn't being told on to fans. So in terms of, is it a fair comparison? Well, is it fair that those clubs aren't being as transparent? I think they should be. So I think those clubs who are being transparent should be rewarded for it. And that's sort of why it's scored the way it is.
Okay, this is from Mitch. Hi, Mitch. Surely you are asking the wrong questions, Josh. The Fair Play Award does not give the true picture. I think Accrington Stanley are leagues above us, sadly. They have an owner that regularly communicates. Now, I'll go on to Accrington Stanley a bit more here. This is from Craig. How does he respond to the comments of the Accrington chairman that the Fairgame project is an infantile stunt? And second, based on my own experience of teaching research methods to university students for 35 years, are you not mistaking good marks in your Fairgame index for summation of things that are the easiest to measure? Now, let's talk about the Accrington Stanley chairman first and foremost. An infantile stunt. What would you say to that?
I think our response to Accrington is that we understand that one of the things that Fairgame did not do well enough in this period, and we've held our hands up in our own sort of internal meetings, is the communication of the index and how the scoring has worked and the overall messaging of what should have came out from the index. And I think that's why we've had so many questions around the scoring and how it all works, is because of the likes of Accrington Stanley scoring so low, when sort of logic dictates that we all know Accrington Stanley are a well-run football club from what Andy's been publicly about. But in terms of the measurements in which we sort of the data points which we collected for this index, when it comes to financial accounts, they haven't been disclosed. When it comes to certain government sort of policies, when it comes to, like, I know I've used the anti-slavery example, but there's over 200 touch points. So in terms of all the policies that they sort of should be transparent with, they haven't been. So it's not that, it might just be the case of, we all know that Accrington Stanley will be running their finances very well. I know that personally because I've seen them when I was at the EFL. I've seen their finances and they were a very well-run club. But if they don't show that, how do the fans actually know, other than taking it off from the word? And obviously they can see transfer policies and they can see that the football club are being responsible. So you can see it, but if you don't actually see the numbers, if they don't disclose their full accounts, you don't actually know. Do you know what I mean? Even though the messaging around Accrington Stanley is, we're really transparent, we tell you all this stuff, but unless you actually disclose the numbers, we can't score a club if they don't disclose the numbers. So I think the Fairgame Index is done the correct way, because essentially what is measured is what is disclosed to the fans, because we want fans to be able to hold clubs to account.
Okay, so, should more be then? I mean, let's take Swindon, for example, because most people are concerned with Swindon who watch this. Yeah. But let me Crawley Town finished bottom, right, on 12.5. They're now in League One, right? So many people would look at that and go, hang on a minute, Crawley Town finished bottom of this Fairgame index, and yet they got promotion at the end of last season. Swindon Town finished 5th, and they finished 19th, their lowest ever league position in modern times. So does that point to Crawley being well run or Swindon being well run? How would you balance that?
I think in terms of balance, it's the whole point around this, transparency again, but also again, you don't know how well, if Crawley might be run well, but if they're not disclosing their information, the fans don't really know that, if that makes sense. Again, I know I'm being around this transparency point, but you can be a really, again, pull back to Accrington, there's loads of examples you can pick out for the index. They might be run really well, but unless they disclose the information, the fans can't really hold them to account on that. And in terms of on-pitch performance, I mean, there's millions of examples across the years where football clubs have been very well because they've rolled the dice and spent a lot of money to get themselves up, but they can't sustain that for a long period. And I'm not saying that's the position that club's specifically in, but just because you're performing well on the pitch doesn't mean you can sustain that level of costs over the next 5 years. And at some point again, I can't speak about certain football clubs because of what I did at the EFL, but when the owner turns off the tap because they can't afford these wage expenditures anymore, that's when the club goes downhill very, very quickly. So on-pitch performance doesn't equal off-pitch performance, especially, again, this is because the ecosystem of football, we shouldn't be rewarding those clubs who are overspending for on-pitch performance if it puts the sustainability of the football club at risk. So,
yeah. Go on. Yeah.
So it's difficult. Again, I haven't spoke to that club directly. I haven't gone through their accounts. So they could be ran very well off the pitch and on the pitch. You know, some clubs get it right both on and off the pitch.
Yeah. Okay. We've seen lots of examples. I mean, we had a photograph posted yesterday of fans being allowed in to watch the women's game and the toilet's not finished, the renovation, things like that. I mean, would that come into your index for next season? Obviously, Swindon have now appointed a fan engagement officer, Vicky Isles, who's been a lifelong fan of the club. So hopefully she can make a bridge between the fans and the football club. But what sort of things come into it? I know you go on about sustainability, things like that. But when people see toilets that aren't finished, they see wires hanging from the roof, as we saw in the picture recently. You see, that's like, here's my foot, shoot it, isn't it? I mean, it's that simple.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. That isn't something that any football fan wants to experience on a match day when they turn up. A lot of the fan engagement side of the index was based around fan representation and fan voice. So, for example, does your board have a person from the trust or a fan representative on the board of the football club? So it's more to do with the communication lines between the club and the fans. And it was more based around this concept, because if you don't have representation on your board, and that's why you have a look at a lot of fan-owned clubs do very well in fan engagement, because they have all this in place. So although, yes, absolutely, fan engagement and sort of fan experience is making sure the toilets work and those sort of messages. But I mean, if you have a fan representative on the board and at the next meeting, the fan representative is being able to say, look, the toilets aren't working, what is going on here, etc., they can raise those sort of issues to the board and make it a priority for them to act on. Whereas if you don't have that in place and you have these sort of issues, and you can pick any sort of match day issue, if you don't have the relationship with the board of directors, if you can't actually make your voice heard, it almost doesn't matter what the issue is, how major, how minor, they're not going to be listened to. So in terms of how it was measured, it was more to do with the relationship between the board and the fans and how the relationships work compared to individual issues, because there'll be thousands across all the clubs that we looked at.
How important is communication from the football club? Because one of the criticisms leveled at Swindon have been the lack of communication. The owner, as you know, lives in Australia. So that's obviously quite a distance away. But how important is it that one-to-one communication? I mean, we have video links these days. You know, you can record a video, all that kind of stuff. How important is that?
Oh, vitally important. I think you can't overstate the importance of listening to the fans and having that one-to-one, because without that, again, it sort of comes back to having someone on the board as a thing, but even just having these wider communications with a wider fan base is really important, because that's when you really get into the issues. And it's sort of like, to take this from a financial point of view, it's like, if you compared to like sitting as a director sitting to a data analyst, the data analyst is the person that's in the numbers day in, day out, whereas the person who's the director only sort of sees the top level things that happen. Every now and then you need to get back into the data, back into the numbers to understand what's going on. And it's the same with the fans. It's like, you can see the overarching messages that are coming, like generally through social media, or you can analyze trends or whatever. Unless you have this one-to-one communication, unless you actually sit down with the fans, whether it be virtually over Teams or in person, you need to get back in touch with them so that you can actually sense what's going on at ground level. And that's why, you know, making sure that you have representatives, if you can't attend in person, but making sure there's always represented reps on a match day who are in the ground, who can feel what's going on, who can overhear, you know, the talks in the local bars, just making sure that they are connected to the community is absolutely vital.
We had a lot of issues in the opening game of the season. Toilets weren't working properly, the seats were dirty, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, that's the thing that really annoys football fans, because you pay 24, 25 quid, you turn up. Didn't help that Swindon lost 4-0 in the opening home game of the season. That never helps. But, you know, you turn up and you want at least some measure of comfort. We're not in the 60s where I stood on the terraces and you couldn't go to the toilet, so people went where they stood. You know, that's how it was. But we're not there anymore. So people want a level of comfort, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's the basics. It's the little things that make a massive difference. I mean, again, taking it to a different analogy that people may not care about, but I play golf, right? And there's little things like making sure that the water in the ball cleaner is clean water, not dirty water, because of the smell and all the rest of it. It's like, it's the little things that people care about, especially when they're paying the money to be there and support the club. And it's also a level of care. Like when you see the dirty seats, when you see the toilets unworking, you feel that the club doesn't care enough about the fans to make sure that these things are right for when the fans turn up. And I understand that feeling. I understand why those small things matter, because at the football club, there might be larger issues that need the focus of the staff members, and there might be other things going on. And the cleaning of the seats is obviously a vitally important job, but in terms of the priority list, it should have been far higher, but obviously wasn't, and was obviously a job that wasn't carried out. I mean, it clearly didn't happen. So again, I don't really have much of an excuse for that sort of thing. It needs to be done. That sort of stuff needs to be done for the fans.
What do you expect to see from Swindon over the next 12 months then? I mean, all right, you put them into 5th in the table. What would make them top? I mean, I think Wimbledon are top, aren't they? You know, because 57.8 out of 100. Wimbledon, of course, fan-owned, got trust, all that kind of stuff. So what do you expect from Swindon over the next 12 months? It would make them get up that table. And how would you explain to Swindon fans that they've done this because, in simple terms, I mean, because I understand all you're saying about numbers and sustainability and all that kind of thing, but what the average Swindon Town fan wants to know, and I'm kind of one of them, is that your club's been well run. You've got every chance of competing. All right, you may not win the league. You might finish 10th, but, you know, you've got a fair chance of competing. But how do you explain, what do you expect from the football club that they can make fans feel better about it? Because that's the point. They don't feel good about it.
Yeah, I think in terms of, so there's two separate questions there. What do I expect? So expectations are that the the supporters trust, yourselves, the football club continue to work with Fairgame to help them improve on transparency and communications with the fans. I think a lot of these issues around the club can be resolved with communication. And as well, obviously, getting the basics right in terms of cleaning the seats and the toilets and making sure everything's okay. That's I mean, get the basics right, but also communication and making sure they're disclosing the appropriate documentation, the appropriate sort of making sure they like, because Swindon Town have a really good sort of foundation. The fact that, like you say, the stadium itself is half owned by the fans, or the supporters trust, and the other half obviously owned by the club. There's lots of fan engagement. They're working actively with Fairgame. The foundation to build on is here now. And it's just a case of moving that forward. And I do feel like the club has prioritized this because they understand that, well, there's two sides of it. One, football without the fans is nothing. So, like, taking everything away with it, football without fans is nothing. But also they understand if they want to be a sustainable football club moving forward and they want to engage the community and therefore obviously sell more tickets, get more commercial partners because they've got more bums in seats and all the rest of it, it only makes sense for the club to want to be transparent, to want to rebuild these relationships. They don't want fans protesting against them. So they'll do whatever it takes to get the fans back on side. So over the next 12 months, the more this goes on and the more pressure the fans put onto the club, the more that they're going to want to work with, obviously just themselves putting more out publicly. It doesn't have to everything come through Fairgame, but I feel like the football club and the supporters trust and everybody else will be far more active and just continue to build the relationship and try to sort of answer all these questions that the fans have.
Yeah. Another question is, would an itemised account of income and outgoings be transparent? I mean, I know there is a thing called commercial sensitivity, and we all understand that. But, you know, one thing that annoys people more than anything is this phrase undisclosed. And you must come across this a lot. You know, in the old days, Fred Bloggs, he cost £100,000 from Brighton. You know, Sid cost 200 grand, blah, blah, blah. You kind of knew where you were. But now they're all undisclosed. I mean, what does Fairgame think about that?
We want transparency. So the more transparent the club can be, they should be. There's obviously situations where they can't. There's also situations where the media do get things wrong and they disclose incorrect figures. I mean, I worked at the EFL and I would see things that I'm looking at the numbers. That's the number that they're showing on the screen. It's not the same number. And unfortunately, there is, again, I'm not saying Swindon Town are involved with this in any sense, but in terms of I have seen in football where certain figures are inflated to help the PR of the player or to help the PR of the signing or whatever. There is obviously I mean, I'm not saying anything that's not common sense here. There is lots of stuff that happens in the world of football. But in terms of undisclosed, again, sometimes there is legal reasons why they can't disclose certain information. But obviously, the more transparent a football club can be, they obviously should be.
Yeah, a former player of ours, Colin Gordon, became an agent, and we had him on this very thing some months ago. Great player for us. And he said that he can't understand for 1 minute why not every transfer fee is published. You know, he just doesn't understand it. So that's why he can't understand why football clubs don't do that. I mean, I do get it, like you said. You know, an agent certain agents want their client to be worth more money. I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? But that's one thing I think which bugs a lot of people, the fact that all transfer deals seem to be undisclosed. So maybe that's something, I don't know what Fairgame can get into. Here's another one. I think as an organisation, you need to talk to the fans before you publish these out-of-date reports. There's not a lot of fan engagement. Listen to us. I mean, is that a fair point?
The thing, I absolutely agree with communication with fans. We can try to be even more open and maybe host more sort of open forums where fans can sign up and be a part of and engage and say. And I think that'd be a great thing to do. But also, for me, the timing doesn't matter as much. So what I mean is when the index, for me, I more care about the direction of football and how can we improve football. Not necessarily at the point in which we report or the point in which we state the index. It doesn't really matter. So for me, if the index goes out and we're having this discussion now, and this can help towards the next index, like it's sort of, as long as these communication channels are open, are talking, and people have the chance to sort of engage with the index. And I think the release of the report is what gets everyone involved. Like if we were to again, I know a lot of fans would be, but if some fans just heard there's going to be an index produced, are you happy to do this? A lot of fans, that doesn't really get traction and people don't engage. Where as soon as they see the numbers, everybody wants to get involved and everybody wants to then sort of build behind this. So for me, again, yes, absolutely, we should be talking to fans more, and we should try and get as many ideas and voices and get a holistic picture of the game from as many people as we can. But yeah, I don't see that as a bad thing at all. I think it definitely should happen. But for me, before, after, whatever, if it's after this one, it's before the next one, if that makes sense. Like, as long as we're communicating, I think that's the main point.
This is from Stephen. Hi, Fifey. Falls rushing at 9 o'clock, by the way, if you want more football and Swindon Town content. When key individuals like Andy Holt rubbish fair game, how seriously should we as fans treat it? I mean, one of my questions was going to be, what impact does your report have? Are you a major player in football, or as some have said, an irrelevance? I mean, what would you say to that? Do your reports have any impact on the game of football?
In terms of the importance of fair game as an organisation, so I'll take you back to what fair game was initially and where we sit as an organisation. So fair game. So Niall Cooper formed fair game because he saw that governance in football and everything needed to change, and he saw the need for an independent regulator to come into football to actually get control of what's going on before the game gets even further into mess. Fair Game then went on a mission to sort of partner with as many football clubs and as many MPs and people within government as possible to make the independent regulator happen. Through a lot of hard work, we finally got to a point where it looks like it's gone from a when rather than an if on the independent regulator. This independent regulator is happening. This is a massive win for Fair Game, and it shows the importance of Fair Game as an organisation, and our voice within the new independent regulator is as respected and as strong as any voice in football. We are a very respected organisation in that sense. When people have a negative view on the index and the work of Fair Game, of course, it's going to have a negative impact on essentially Fair Game's brand. But we also know that when you release an index in any sort, the people at the top are going to be singing your praises, and the people at the bottom or who feel like they've been misplaced are always going to voice opinions. But I also say, if the fans are upset, if the club's upset, get involved, talk to us. We can explain why you scored, exactly how you scored. We can run through it with the club, and we can try and work on things with them, especially in an Accrington case. And we're going back to the Accrington point. I know, because I've seen, again, when I was back at the EFL, I know that Accrington are a well-run club, and there's no reason why they can't be transparent on their numbers, their policies, everything else, that allows them to score more points on the index. So for me, if you're upset with your scores, that's more of a reason why you should be engaging, rather than, it's easy to just go, oh, that's a load of rubbish, I don't want to deal with that. It's like, actually, as a fans, you should be like, we need to be engaging more with these people because they're clearly trying to hold clubs to account. Again, we're only using transparent information that's out publicly for the fans. So we could, because we have had the sort of question put to us of like, why could you have not gone to all the clubs and sort of like seen their finances, or like engaged in surveys directly with the clubs on their governance policies and all the rest of it? The point is, it's not based on what we could gone and gathered. It's what they're being transparent with the fans, because that's the point. It's all about make it public, make sure it's glass windows, like stop bricking up the walls and making sure no one can see what's going on. We want more transparency. So we're only ever going to measure clubs on what's transparent, because if they score badly and they're a run club, that's an easy fix. Surely you just become more transparent and your index score goes through the roof. Like it shouldn't be a difficult fix for those clubs. So yes, we do need to manage these relationships, and we are over the next few weeks. We have a lot of calls booked in with a lot of football clubs to go through and explain what's gone on. But for a lot of these clubs, it is easy wins. We haven't done anything like crazy here. It's just they haven't necessarily been as transparent as they should have been on the information that they already have to hand. So it's more of a transparency issue.
You see, one of the problems was when the owner took over, he said, we will be completely open and transparent. I mean, can a football club be completely open and transparent? Is that a possibility?
I think that there's a road. I think there's a road to understand what transparency means to every fan and every organization. So can they ever be 100% transparent? To the nail, no. They can't tell you what's in every single player's contract. They can't tell you the bonus structure. They can't tell you that. Like that wouldn't happen, right? That legally wouldn't happen. Agents, football club, it would be, so they can't do that. But in terms of what's expected from the fans, it's understanding what do the fans expect in terms of transparency and what does football expect. And football clubs will just continue to learn and listen, do a report like Swindon have. These fans have come back, actually, that administration expenses, we need a further breakdown on that for the next one. Okay, no problem. The next issue comes out, they can be further transparent. And then it might get to a point and it's actually, we can't be any more transparent on that issue because of X, Y, and Z legal issue. But they'll be transparent as they can. And I think it's up to the fans to sort of raise where they're expecting more transparency and where it's sort of, to what extent do they need to sort of show their information.
Paul says, how many points off do Fairgame give when clubs make admin errors and you end up under an embargo? You may well know that Swindon did go into transfer embargo for 2 windows, I think, was suspended. But that kind of thing annoys fans as well, doesn't it? Because, they see 9,000 crowds, they see admin errors, and then they see a transfer embargo, and putting those together is a very difficult process because, you see 9,000 fans going through the gate. The club should be making money, etc., etc. What would you say about that?
In terms of embargoes is a really interesting thing, and obviously that is something I was heavily involved with at the EFL. In terms of, I don't know how much I can say here, but I'll disclose because I don't think I'm saying anything that's too sensitive here. The club will be made aware that they'll be going under embargo before it is made transparent on the EFL website. And they'll have, depending on the level of the issue and depending on that, most issues will tend to have, look, you've got 48 hours to resolve this. And if you resolve it within the first 48 hours, it won't be put onto the website and it will be, you've resolved it in time and we've got no issues. Obviously, if it goes on longer than that, we'll obviously be putting the embargo onto the website so that the fans and everybody can see the issues that the clubs are facing and etc. So football clubs should spend a lot of energy on resolving those issues before they become public information, public knowledge anyway. And you'll be surprised about how many because there are so many regulations and there are so many sort of administrative errors, especially with, the lack of resource certain clubs have and in areas, especially when it comes to governance and finance, how many embargoes happen all the time. Like, it's not something, it sounds like it should be a one-off thing. People get tripped up on certain regulations and things. It's more common than we would like, but it does happen. And in terms of how it's scored in the index, I would have, so just to put my sort of relationship and how I worked with the index this year, I sort of overseed the general and I was more involved with the financial aspect because of my background in finance. I did have some relation with the governance, but we had other academics and other people working on the specific questions and how it was scored based in the governance section of the index. So I'm not certain how they included embargoes in their area of the scoring system. But again, it is something that, again, if it wasn't scored at all, or if it wasn't incorporated correctly in this version of the index, it should definitely be something that should be looked forward to. But again, that continues with constant monitoring of the EFL's website to ensure what embargoes are posted when. And as well, it is difficult because, well, it's slightly different because again, this is not just England. I know we're focused on Swindon, but it's not. The Fairgame Index also looks across leagues, and different leagues have different policies around this sort of stuff. So we need to make sure it's something that can go across football. So, for example, one of the things that we looked at one point in terms of the environmental score within the index was if they're a EFL green club, which is something that the EFL do. But then it's like, we can't score them for that necessarily because a Scottish club can't be an EFL green club, or a Premier League can't be an EFL Green Club or a National League can't, because it's an EFL thing. So we need to make sure whatever we put out there in terms of how we're sort of scoring football needs to be appropriate to the divisions, or at least make sure that it works, or you find the equivalent in the different leagues to make sure that all the points are sort of, you can measure them against each other.
What about the late the transfer of shares without disclosing to the Football League? I mean, you were with the EFL. That happened at Swindon. How serious is that?
Again, there's lots of different, when it comes to shares. So in terms of the rules, it's if anyone owns more than 10% shares, they have to disclose who that person is. And sometimes this can happen. I'm going to say, like, again, I don't want to talk about any specific examples. So to show sort of the complexity of the issue, because of football clubs aren't just football clubs. You'll have parent companies, subsidiaries. It's not as clean as it wants. So, for example, if someone buys 50% of a company that owns 20% of a football club, they've actually become a 10% owner in the football club inadvertently, and therefore would need to disclose themselves as an owner of the football club, even if they're only investing 50% into a different company that only owns 20% of the football club. I know that's like a crazy example, but it shows that sometimes it's not as clear cut as it seems. It's like, if you're buying the football club, you surely know your stake and all the rest of it, and they should be disclosing this. And again, if football clubs aren't doing this correctly, this also comes into a resource issue, I think, as well. It's sort of like, you should, if it's resource or expertise in terms of what the regulations are and what they're expected to disclose and what they're expected to tell to the EFL/wider community or whatever. So it's a case of, if you didn't have the resource to get the paperwork filled out or wherever the issue is, then that's a resource issue. Or if you didn't have the knowledge that you needed to fill out said forms and submit said forms, that's an expertise deficiency. So when these issues come up at football clubs, unless you're purposely being sort of malice and purposely trying to not disclose things, that's a completely separate issue, which I think is highly unlikely. If it's a skill or resource, that's where, again, Fairgame can be involved and can support all other organizations and other consultants out there who can help in these areas. So, yeah, I think that's a lot of the sort of issues when it comes around sort of owners and directors tests and sort of share disclosures and things like that.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask you about director's tests at the end, because that's another thing which is a bit like seeing pigs fly for most people. Find it very difficult to take your index seriously when they ranked us 5th in League Two. We have multiple late and outstanding payments, multiple EFL and FA charges, massive turnover of staff and players, and decreasing attendances year on year. How can this be defined as one of the most well-run clubs in the league? Asked Max. And I mean, I think that's the crux of a lot of people's feelings about this. You know, I think, if I'm being honest, the sort of Fairgame report was looked upon as a bit of a silver bullet. It would give everybody the answers they wanted. As we said earlier on, we were told to wait for the Fairgame report. It came out, didn't give the answers people wanted. You know, and hence all the questions that are in that question. What would you say to that? How can it be defined as one of the most well-run clubs in the league?
So there's two things around this. One, in terms of it not giving the results people wanted. It didn't matter what score, what club got, and what order. There'll always be people that wanted different. We're never everyone's going to be happy. That's never going to be the case. No, there's never going to be an index and people go, I absolutely agree with everything that's gone on in this report, and I agree with every single score, and every single club's happy with exactly how it's gone. That was never going to. Would never get to that place anyway. So that's the one thing. And in terms of the communication, this is where I believe that Fairgame got some of the messaging wrong around the index this year. And what I mean is by this is, and this is around the scoring again, because when we state about the sustainability and this is the most well-run club, I think that statement isn't what should have been. That shouldn't have been the communication method. Shouldn't have been the statement. It should have been, this club is, again, it's not as catchy for the things, but essentially this club is the most transparent with their information around these certain areas, and the information that they have disclosed, we've able to analyze, and therefore they've scored this. it's not very catchy, but in terms of the explanation of how the scores have happened and what it happens, it essentially go that that's why sort of the PLC clubs, in terms of your Celtics, Tottenham's, Man United, I know some aren't anymore, but like those clubs that were public limited company have scored very well because they legally had to disclose a lot of information. So they were always going to score very well because they're held by account by law. They have to disclose this club stuff. Interestingly, fan-owned clubs also did very well because even though legally they don't have to disclose this, fans keep them to account. So fans say, I want you to disclose this information. As we can see here today, this is literally what this call is about. We want you to disclose more. We want you to communicate more. And those fans who have a seat on the board, who can really push these issues, are going to score more highly on this sort of stuff because they've got that accountability. They're being held to account by the fans. And sort of the point of the index is like we were sort of, the hope was when people saw their club score poorly, it isn't a case of, we know that Accrington Stanley is a well-run football club, logically. I think everybody can see that. But I do believe that the fans should hold the club to account to be more transparent, especially around their finances and other areas. They don't disclose full accounts. They don't show all the financial information. They should be. There's no reason why they shouldn't, because they're actually a well-run football club. It's crazy that they don't disclose it. It's not like they have nothing to hide, or they shouldn't have anything to hide. Just show the stuff. So in terms of this football club is the best run football club, I think it's based on the information that they've been transparent enough to give to the fans, and us then analysing this information and scoring it how we score it. This is what is topped the index. I think it's an easy statement for sort of communication, and it's an easy statement to sort of the media attention around the statements were really strong, but I do think we shouldn't have used those words. I do think the communication was wrong.
Okay. This is from Nick. Now, those of us who are old enough to remember will remember David Mellor, who used to be on 6 to 6. Now, you probably are old enough to remember David Mellor. But anyway, he's a former MP, Chelsea fan, and he was always banging on about his football task force and what they would do for football. Well, as far as I'm no, nothing happened with the football task force. So Nick asks, will the regulator have the power to force clubs to disclose all information to make accurate comparisons, like everyone has to declare information to HMRC? I think the point he's making is, will this have teeth? Off what, Ofcom, off this, off that. Will he have teeth, or she have teeth?
Absolutely. There's no reason why the independent regulator won't have full transparency to everything that the clubs have. The reason why I can say that is I also already know that this is a requirement that the EFL have anyway. So it's like they have to disclose all their information to the EFL, and the EFL can request essentially anything they like to be disclosed from the football clubs. Like if they want a piece of information, the club have to disclose it. So there's no reason why the independent regulator won't be in the exact same position. In terms of will all that information be able to become publicly available? Obviously not. That in terms of like the independent regulator and the EFL will probably have all the wages and the transfer and everything to the dot. Like they'll have every information. Will all that information ever come public? No. But should the independent regulator have access to all this information? Yes. And I think this is where the independent regulator and what Fairgame are trying to do is sort of they work in tandem. But also, I think the transparency point is really key, because I still think even if clubs are running well, I do think they need to tell the fans. This is the whole point. We want fans to be more informed. So although, like I say, we could have gone to all the clubs and collected all their information individually, and if they're willing to even disclose to us, like confidentially, and scoring clubs well based on that, I don't think that's the point. I think the point is, let's try and force the clubs to be more transparent. Those clubs who are transparent, let's reward, because, we can give you more points because there's more points available to be won because you've disclosed more on these issues. So, yes, I do believe the independent regulator will have teeth. I think it will just depend on how the governance bill is wrote and what is the scope of the independent regulator. And that's really key. And that is something that Fairgame have been working really closely with the government on what is the wording of this bill and how does it actually, like on a granular level, what is this word by word? What will you actually have access to? Because like you said, an independent regulator that doesn't have teeth, there's no point in having.
Pointless.
Like if we're gonna do this, we need to do this correctly. We don't want VAR. We want goal line technology. Do you know what I mean? Like to put it into football terms, like we want the absolutes. Or if there's no point.
Yeah, is it Lisa Nandy you're working with? I think she's the latest culture. I'd lose track of who's culture minister and who isn't. They change so often. But just EFL fit and proper persons tests. Then you were with the EFL. Our fit and proper persons test fit and proper? Because it seems to me, you know, the point I'm making. The amount of clubs over the years we've seen, you know, people have passed fit and proper persons tests, and they've been a complete disaster for football clubs. And you know, a lot of Swindon fans ask, are fit and proper persons tests fit and proper?
So again, this is more of a question from my time at the EFL rather than a fair game question, but I'm more than happy to answer it anyway. So the regulations are constantly being updated, and the word by word, just like if you compare the handbooks year on year, the regulations are getting tighter, the regulations are getting better, and it has been a real focus of the EFL because you can see, I think there's a lot of cases where the fit and proper persons test, even certain stuff like how regularly the fit and proper persons test is run is the situation that needs to be discussed, because it's just like if you pass something and then haven't been checked in 10 years and you've been running, like things can happen. So it's in terms of like making sure that these reviews of the owners and everything are on a continuous basis. And so there's lots of stuff that will always need to be improved in the regulations. But again, and this is where I think is the biggest benefit of the independent regulator, in my opinion. So again, not going into like too many specifics, but it's difficult. It's a very difficult position for whoever's making that decision on whether someone can buy a football club. Because, for example, if a football club is about to go into administration, it's about to go bump, it's about to literally go off the face of the planet of the earth. We've seen it happen to football clubs. You've got an owner, you've looked at the bank accounts, they've got the money, they're willing to invest, they want to buy the football club, but there are certain issues around the individual that you may not align with fully. Or like, I'm not saying they don't pass the regulations, but you can tell there's some grey area in what's going on.
Yeah.
Someone, and up to now has been the EFL, needs to make that call. Do we let them buy the club? And then the football club can go on for X amount of periods until obviously it may run into problems again because of the new owner that's come in. Or do we just let the club vanish? And the issue is, if, again, and I'm not saying this is why the EFL do what they do, this isn't the case, but that's a hard call, because if the fans know that there's an owner there willing to put in the money, and whoever it is, if it's the independent regulator, EFL saying, no, they can't buy the football club because of the fit and proper person test and all the rest of it, you're going to have to go into administration, you're going to have to lose your club. No one wants to make that decision. It's a very hard call. So around the fit and proper persons test, yes, the regulations need to be tightened, and they are continuously being worked on year in, year out. And I think it will get better and better. But that hard question of when you're put in that position, does the football club go or do you let the owner in? Because you got to remember, it costs a lot of money to run a football club. So there's only, it's not like there's hundreds of thousands of people, well, probably is on the macro, but like that can buy this football club. There's probably only one or two, if you're lucky, buyers that are really in the position to buy this asset. So it's a case of like, you're going to have, like, it's not a case of like you're going to have to, but at some point you need an owner of the football club. So you need to be able to make an informed decision as to which owner should be allowed to go forward. So it's a really tricky.
Just a bit of transfer news, actually, whilst we're here. Swindon Town have announced the loan signing of Kabongo Shumanga from League One side Peterborough United. That's subject to EFL approval. Do you give that EFL approval, Josh? I mean, can you do that? So he's Kabongo Shumanga is with Swindon Town, I assume, for the whole of the season. So that is just breaking. So that signing has been confirmed. Right. Just finally, then, what does Swindon Town need to do now? I mean, because we've all been through a period where we're all a bit fed up and a bit tired of all this. As you said earlier, Swindon Town have been through the mill so many times. Fans are suspicious all the time, with good reason on many occasions. What does Swindon Town need to do to allay those fears? What do they need to pick the phone up to you? Do they need to get advice? Do they need to get PR? What do they need to do?
They need to work with the fans. They need to work with Fairgame, in my opinion. But again, I'm going to say that as Fairgame. So you got to be honest about that. For me, it's a case of talking with the fans, understanding the issues, and being transparent as possible. And I think using Fairgame as a third party, have the expertise and everyone they have the resource that's needed to help clubs resolve these issues. They can act as an honest third party. So in terms of there's no vested interest for Fairgame. We're only going to come out with because the issue is, and this is one of the things that's happened, is when it doesn't matter if the club say it, the fans won't believe it because it's come from the club. Like, they need someone to have checked what's going on and to check what's being stated and what's being said. So it helps having that third party come in to oversee these statements and to put these statements out there or to put these reports out there as an independent third party. It always is helpful. So what Swindon need to do, engage with Fairgame and ourselves. They need to engage with the fans, and they need to just keep building brick by brick. I don't think anyone expects there to be like an instant solution to everything, but they need to be shown that the club is heading in a direction that's positive, and it's got an ethos that all the fans can get behind and really work towards, and sort of really get back the sort of love of turning up on a match day because they believe in the direction of the club and they believe in the owners and they believe in everything. And the only way you get that is through the communication, is through talking about, this is our plans, this is what we're looking at doing, these are our finances, this is everything. Are you in? And as supporters, I mean, I also don't need to say this, as supporters, through thick and thin, you'll be there anyway. But in terms of what the club need to do, they do need to just continue to work with the fans, with Fairgame, keep moving step by step to a more sustainable, just a better future for the football club.
Yeah, you see, there are people in the background who people continually ask about, and they're not happy that those people are there. What would you say about that?
It's a difficult question. It's difficult in terms of, especially when you're talking about key specific individuals at specific football clubs. I think this is where there needs to be more transparency as to where everybody sits, what everybody's role is. And this is not just Swindon Town, this is everyone, to make sure that the fans understand why individual board members are there, or individual members who seem to have a lot of control but aren't necessarily stated on the board or whatever. Like, what is everybody's role at the football club? And I think it literally just doubles back to transparency. I think it really does. And I think sometimes if you just explain what's going on, the fans will buy into the club, because they want to. Like, fans don't want to be in a position where they're questioning the board, they're questioning the football club, and they don't trust the people in the club. And yeah, I think it's a really tricky situation, but I think it's just one of those where it does need to be ironed out, and this is where further communication can only be useful on matters like this.
Josh, we appreciate your time. You're going to publish a link, is that with more information on? Is that right?
Yes, I can send across a link to another report that basically analyzes the position, the financial position of Swindon Town to the other clubs in League Two in the 22-23 season. So that is out there. So then you can sort of see how the expenses lie against other football clubs' expenses, how the revenue lies against it. Well, I'm going to say this because my consultancy firm, Goal Assist, wrote the report with the football club. But it's actually directly with the trust. We work with the trust, but obviously all the information is about the club and how it all works against the other League Two clubs. But yes, I'll definitely share that link. And I'm more than happy to ever come back if you want to ask more questions.
I'm sure we will have you back on at some point because, excuse me, as you're aware, people have a lot of questions. And as you say, those questions ought to be answered. So we really appreciate the time, Josh. Thank you. And especially on a bank holiday Monday and a last minute replacement too. So thank you very much, Dee, for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thanks ever so much, Josh. And thanks. I've certainly got a better understanding of where it comes in and everything. So I hope other people have as well. So thank you very much. Right, next week we will have a panel. We're playing Notts County on Saturday, so we'll have a panel on Monday night. So if you're able to join us then, please do. But thank you everybody for watching. Sorry we couldn't get through all the questions, but we've only got a limited amount of time. So, but see you all next week. Bye-bye.
I have to hold on.